Hello.
Hello.
Hi. Hello.
Welcome everyone to April Hill, the home of Greenagers, and for today, the home of Crossroads. We are very glad to have the Crossroads program here, as well as a number of other events. But firstly, let me get to some of the important pieces. Bathroom is across the patio, into follow the signs for office. Basically go in through the patio, take a right, and look on to your right if you need to use the facilities. That's where they are. Let me start off with our land acknowledgement. It is with gratitude and humility that we acknowledge that the land that we steward, including April Hill and all of our conservation work sites, is part of the ancestral homelands of the Stockbridge-Munsee Band of Mohicans, the indigenous peoples of this land. Despite tremendous hardship in being forced from here, today their community resides in Wisconsin and is known as the Stockbridge-Munsee community. We pay honor and respect to their ancestors, past and present, as we commit to building a more inclusive and equitable space for all. At Greenagers, we commit to educating young people about indigenous inhabitants of this land and their history, and incorporating race and land equity into our curricula and practices. We also commit to paying an annual voluntary land tax to the Stockbridge-Munsee community. On a similar note, after this presentation, please stay a while and take in the exhibit that we are proudly hosting that the Sheffield Historical Society put together last year. It's quite an exhibit and helps to further the story of that community that I just spoke of. I'd like to say thanks certainly to the Smithsonian, particularly to the Bushnell Sage Library for hosting all of these programs over the last month or more. And what's even more impressive was all the work that went into prior to that to make it all happen. Dina Caswell, our librarian, is here. Yes. And I also think we should thank the community of Sheffield. It's an extraordinary community, and I'm glad to be a resident of Sheffield. I won't say too much about Greenagers, save to say that our mission is to connect young people with the environment, with sustainable agriculture, and through those with their community. If you'd like to learn more about that, please come see me afterwards, visit our website. We have a number of engaging programs in education, in workforce development, that brings 200 to 300 young people either onto this property or engages them in other activities in the tri-state area. So please do, if you don't know about us, please look us up and find out more. And there's a guest book out back. If you haven't signed in already, please do, and you can receive further communications from us and the library and other community events. So on to what the program for today. We're really lucky to have Nancy Smith, Kathy Orlando, and Rennie Wendell here to speak to us about the nature of Sheffield. I have some brief bios here, and then we will bring them up here to give their offering to you. First, we have Nancy Smith. For 20 years, Nancy worked for the Sweetwater Trust, whose mission was to create permanent wilderness conservation in New England, New York, and Quebec. She helped found both the Sheffield Land Trust, president from '89 to '95, and the Northeast Wilderness Trust. Her favorite sports are kayaking the Everglades and cypress swamps of Florida, hiking the southern Berkshires, putting up trail cameras to glimpse wild animals day and night. Currently she's writing a book with photographs tentatively titled Downwind. Second up, we have Kathy Orlando, whose bio, if to the uninitiated, might look like the New Deal. But Kathy is the Executive Director for Land Protection for the Sheffield Land Trust, where she has worked for over 30 years. Kathy is also Chair of the Mass Land Trust Coalition Steering Committee, a member of the Mass Easement Defense Subcommittee, and the Land Trust representative to the Agricultural Lands Preservation Committee under the Mass Department of Agricultural Resources. She also serves on a number of town and other nonprofit boards, including the Community Land Trust in the Southern Berkshires, Berkshire County Farm Bureau, and the Agricultural, Historical, and Housing Commissions for the town of Sheffield, the latter as chair. Previously, Kathy served on the board of the Upper Housatonic Valley National Heritage Area and on the town's Conservation Commission and chaired the town's Municipal Comprehensive Plan Steering Committee. She received a BA from Wheaton College and a JD from Pace Law School. She is also an avid photographer. And lastly, we have Rennie Wendell, who is a true homegrown naturalist. He has degrees in environmental science from both Berkshire Community College and Massachusetts College of Liberal Arts. He has worked in the Berkshires as a land steward for almost 20 years. He has done this in some of the most beloved and sensitive habitats, including Bartholomew's Cobble and Schnaub Brook. He currently works for the Nature Conservancy, where he helps manage 8,000 acres in Western Mass. He enjoys hiking, wild edibles, collecting, and long walks on the beach looking for shorebirds. I can also attest that he likes fooling high schoolers with raisinets in the woods. And I just wanted to say briefly about all these folks that they are all, to my mind, excellent neighbors. And by this I mean that they bring no pretense to their community dealings. They're smart, and they listen, and they do good work, and they're always willing to help others. And as such, I think they certainly meet the challenge that the Crossroads Project presents to examine ourselves and our towns in this rural existence and to find the future of our community and our democracy there. So with that, I'll welcome Nancy. Number one, number two.
Thank you. Let me know if you can't hear me, because the last thing I did, nobody could hear me. It was awful. So just, okay, good. Yeah. Thank you, Will. It's absolutely a delight to, have been working with you. You're a can-do guy, kind of a guy. And Dina Caswell as well. It's really been fun. And I also wanted to give a shout out to Angela Suras-Patel, because she had said, when I didn't think I could be here, that she would be happy to do this program, and then here I am. So if you came to hear, Angela, I'm sorry, you got me. I have a riddle, if I can remember it. What do fire and brimstone and 20-foot mountains and a wide, shallow tropical ocean and mile-high blue ice and a deep lake full of ice and logs and boulders? What do, wait a minute, and then elephants. Elephants is part of, what do all these things come to mean? And also something called, that I just came across the other day, which I can't wait to tell you about. It's called Nunatak. So a Nunatak. So what do all these things have in common? April Hill Farms is what they have in common. So I decided that we might as well pitch the whole thing to this place and not just to Sheffield, there's the history of the geology of these areas really is very particular to places. So, and we'll get to the Nunatak soon. Okay, we're going to go back 500 million years ago to, I'm going to talk fast. We're going to go back 500 million years ago to the time when Earth was young, brand new, really. It was molten, orange, magma rain, burning winds, fire and brimstone. And as it began to cool, it began to crust over, just like lava in a volcano will crust over. So the lava will come out bright orange, intense fire, and then start to crust over with a black crust. So that's what was happening with the Earth as well. And about that time, as the Earth is cooling a bit, the water starts to condense, and rains begin, and oceans are filled. But all of the rock of the continents and all of the oceans right on top of these plates, this crust. And the crust is between 5 kilometers and 60 kilometers deep, depending on where you are. It's much shallower out in the ocean. The plates swivel. They still are today. They swivel, they slide, they turn, they collide, they rift apart. It's very dynamic. It's slow. It's about an inch a year right now, or less than an inch a year, that these big continental plates move. And when they collide, a lot of really interesting things happen. The analogy I like to use is the conveyor belt in a grocery store. Put my crib notes down. I use my hands. So you go up to the conveyor belt, you got your groceries, you put them on the belt, the cashier presses the button, and the belt glides toward the cash register. All your things glide to the end. Then the belt plunges down. And where it plunges, all your groceries, your peanut butter, your bananas, your dish detergent, everything piles up there on the continental shelves of the cash register. And that's really very similar to what happens when the continents collided, when these plates collided, is one goes under the other. The heavier one, which is often the plates of where the oceans are, they go down under the lighter one, and a lot of ocean water also goes down deep into the magma, which is like a real irritant. And this is called subduction, and these areas are called subduction zones. Well, what does that have to do with here? At one point, the plates were down at the equator, and what would become North America, that continent, is straddling the equator. Between Africa and the other continents, there's an ocean called the Iapetus. And the Iapetus Sea, for a long ways, is very shallow and full of limey muck. And there was no Massachusetts at that point. The shoreline was over at the Catskills. So the Iapetus Sea went all the way to the Catskills. And it was rung by brilliant white sand beaches. And it's a warm sea. So what happens eventually, over hundreds of thousands of years, is the African plate and the Iapetus plate hit the North American continent and dive under it. And all of the substrate, all of the ocean bottom is pushed on shore. Now the ocean bottom, and this is very relevant and germane only to the tectonics, and not, for example, to the mountains across the valley. The Iapetus Sea bottom it's very limey, dense, limey ooze with skeletal animal shells from ocean and reef animals that have died there, and it's piled up. And underneath that is marble, which is metamorphosed limestone. And under that is gneiss. And then out a little further is mud, which is going to become schist. So these are all things that get mixed up in this big thrusting where everything is thrust up on the shore and folds like an accordion. And I forgot to tell you about the volcanoes, because when the subduction zone gets really active, the magma comes up and forms volcanoes. So the volcanoes also get swept up with all the muck of the sea bottom and the sand and everything. All of it gets thrust up on the shore. This is called the tectonic orogeny, and it is the basis of the tectonic mountains today. Later, over 100,000 years later, there's another collision or set of collisions called the Akkadian. And they affect everything, but they mostly affected the mountains across the way. So it's a different there's a lot of basement rock over there, there's a lot of nice granite. But we're focused here. Let me get my crib sheet. Oh, I hear a beautiful bird. Gorgeous. So when, at one point the Iapetus Sea disappears, it's gone, it's been pushed on shore. And the distance, Africa and actually the Eurasian plate are beginning to meld together into one big supercontinent called Pangaea. There have been other supercontinents through time, it's thought, and there will be in the future, probably supercontinents. But now, the Pangaea is beginning to weaken, the plates want to move apart, and they begin to do that, and that's called rifting. And what happens in Massachusetts is it starts to get sort of stretched and torn, and some of that occurs in the Connecticut Valley, which is pretty cool, and that's what they call a failed rift valley, because it didn't actually split apart there. The coast is where Boston is, and where the seashore is. That's where the Africa went its way, Europe went its way, and North America. These are infant continents right now. These are not fully formed, but they all started to drift apart. And today, of course, the Atlantic Ocean is still rifting apart at about 1 inch a year. And if you go to Iceland, and if you're looking for a field trip and you care about any of this stuff, go to Iceland. It's amazing. It's amazing. So you can see the ocean trench in the Atlantic is rifting apart, and you can see it on top of the land in Iceland. Fascinating. Anyway, so we have the plates are on the move. They're spinning. They're turning. All the material that was thrust up here made mountains that were like 20,000 feet high, craggy mountains like the Grand Tetons. But so how do we get from there to what we have today with this bucolic landscape that we have, that we love? Weather. Now think about weather. Think about what you went through last year. Let's see, I don't know how many nor'easters we had, snow. Snow and rain and lightning and thunder, and I don't know if there were any tornadoes that kind of approached or hurricanes. Ice, snow, cold, terrible weather. We all, just in 1 year, we experienced that. Well, we're talking about hundreds of millions of years of this weather, and it just wore these mountains down to basically what you see today. There are other forces out there at work, but that's how they disappeared on us and gave us this basic landscape. The Ice Age part, really, of weather, because the North American continent, having drifted so far north, has blocked some of the warm currents from the south, and a period of cold weather moves in, and then warm weather after that. There's kind of a pattern over 100 million years. So the ice ages are really many different glaciers. The last ice age had the researchers think, 4 different glaciers that were attached to it. And the last one was the Wisconsin glacier, and the lobe came down from the Arctic. The ice sheet expanded downwards as it got heavier and heavier with snow and ice, and sunk, and it moved, and it traveled down here. And at the southern front, it developed lobes of ice that went in different places. The lobe of ice that overcame us was it went from the Berkshire Hills all the way across the valley here, over the mountains and the Hudson Valley as well. That was one lobe of ice that came here. And a lot of the reason that people understand the behavior of these glaciers is because they left behind these moraines. I mean, when they got all the way down to as far as Long Island and Cape Cod, they stopped and they dropped a huge amount of material, which became Long Island and Cape Cod. And then the weather begins to warm. It's uneven, but the glacier begins to melt back. It goes slowly and haltingly. From the work that's been done with the with the moraines, they're called recessional moraines. So every time the glacier stopped and halted, it would drop material. And those things are called recessional terrains. And they've been studied so that it kind of gives a feeling for how many times this glacier stopped. And they think 14 is the magic number for that. I'm going to get to Nantucket now. I just read this the other day. I don't usually go back this far, but it was a paper written by a guy, Frank Taylor, in 1903, who studied the recessional terrains here in Sheffield, and also on the mountains and across into Hudson Valley. So he could tell a lot about the movement of glaciers for that when he put it all together. And so he's the one who first said, and I've been looking, for 40 years I've been trying to find out the answer to this. It was there. It could be wrong, but anyway, what he said is that this lower hump of the Taconic is a Nantucket, which means that this big, heavy, gross sheet of ice didn't completely cover it. So a Nantucket mountain is one that is not completely covered by a glacier. There are some high points that stick up. So I always wondered, because they say that the glacier was a mile high when it was here. So what does that mean for Mount Washington? So anyway, it's the only thing I've ever read about it. So makes sense to me. Anyway, the mountain of ice continues to recede. It's very heavy. It presses so hard that the land is pressed way down into the mantle, and as soon as the glacier goes by, it springs up again. So hundreds of feet. And it is estimated that from Connecticut to sort of mid-northern Vermont took about 4,000 years for this glacier to recede. And of course, it's halting. It stopped 14 times. It may have even advanced a little bit. It just depends on the weather up in the Arctic, what was going on over long periods of time. Anyway, part of what makes the glaciers so exciting, and again, go to Iceland, take a look at those glaciers. It's unbelievable. And the meltwater that you see when you're in Iceland gives you just a glimmer of what it must have been like here. So the glacier is melting, and this is a mile high of ice. So you can imagine when it's melting how much water that is. So in a place like Racebrook Falls, which is where everybody's hiking today, that was a place where there was an enormous torrent, tumultuous meltwater coming down off the mountain through that. It carved Racebrook Falls. It may have taken several glaciers to do it. It's hard to know, since the last glacier is what left the features that we see today, so it's really hard to know. The water winds up going out to the valley. So you have to check this out now when you walk outside. So the valley is filled with water. It's a giant lake. In fact, it's two giant lakes. One lake is around the Housatonic. It's called the Great Falls Glacial Lake. And it goes all the way from Great Falls in Connecticut, where there's a big ice and boulder jam up there, and the water backs up all the way to Great Barrington to Housatonic, to the town of Housatonic. That's how big that was. And as the lake dam sort of breaks up a little bit, so water's released and the lake begins to go down. The other lake is right here, right here. It's the Chenab Brook. It's the Chenab Pro-Glacial Lake, the glacial lake of Chenab, and that one, that was dammed up down near Lime Rock. And I went the other day to drive it so that I could tell you how many miles you have to drive down Salmon Kill Road to get to the dam. And the road is out and you can't get down there. It's not fair, but anyway, I can't tell you, but it's a long ways down there. It's like 20 miles. And when you go down Salmon Kill, when it's fixed, you can see where the water lay. It's just astonishing that you could see where these lakes were. And you can certainly see them down here. I mean, there is, you get these looks across the valley. That was all water at one point, all water. And in fact, you could have called Under Mountain Road, you could have called it Lakeshore Drive, back in those days. So what is left after the glacier and the meltwater left is a lot of really interesting things. Right here on April Hill Farm, you have, I think, a came terrace. A came terrace is when a glacier moves along and it's got ice on one side of it that scrapes up against a durable mountain, and then the came terrace is drift that comes out of the glacier. So it's this recess, this kind of chasm that's back there that goes on for quite a ways, I think is where the ice was. And so this is a came terrace, and it's quite a long one. And I think that's so cool. Another thing that we have here are lacustrine terraces, which are made from the lake, where the lake and the ice have left a lot of undulating drift, gravel, sand, clay along the road. And up and down Under Mountain Road, you can see a lot of that. And we have cobbles and lots of really neat glacial features. Of course, the marble that is here, it was driven here by the Iapeta and the tectonic orogeny, but that was, a lot of that was uncovered during the glacier, and of course, this area is totally famous for its marble, its high quality marble. Sheffield pottery imports clay from Sheffield everywhere, all over the eastern coast, even from further in Ohio and stuff. They sell to Simon Pierce for their pottery. Sheffield clay it came from the distilling out of the lake. And gravel everywhere, ask any gardener. And sand. Those are the major pieces of drift that come from glaciers and the lakes. Now, I did want to mention one thing, which is really fun, and it has to do with, I'm looking at the sort of jug end where a lot of the materials which were pushed up from the Iapeta, which are carbonate rocks, like marble, dolomite, limestone, those rocks are soluble in acid. Like rainfall is slightly acid. So over hundreds of millions of years, rainfall has gotten down into some of that material. and it just made sinkholes and tunnels and even caverns. Right here, it's called the Jug-in Karst. It's kind of famous with spelunkers who want more. But some of the most famous caves are in the Taconic Range, which is further north. The Taconics go 150 miles. This is just the lower piece of it. So up higher, up further north, there are a lot of really cool stories about bandits and counterfeiters and everything that have moved into this cave system to hide. I got into a cave once, first and last time, and I had to kind of, inchworm my way in. I can't remember if I was on my stomach or my back. I remember being concerned about which way I should go in. And I got into it, and you could sit up in there, and it was dank and dark and fetid, and there were bats, little brown bats, all over the ceiling, and I felt so awful for disturbing the bats. And it was not long after that the bats got really ill, and all of the bat species in Massachusetts were listed as endangered. So I felt really bad for these guys. And, excuse me. I felt like I was invading them, like this giant invader from the sun, in their little dark cave. And there was a spot a little down the hill through the guano where there seemed to maybe be a tunnel that you could squeeze through. I had no inclination to go in there. So anyway, that was my one experience up here on Jug End. So, really, I'm not going to cover what Lake Iapetus, what all those materials, all the carbonate rock means for the valley.
Yeah, because you'll totally steal my show. I got nothing else.
I'm sorry, I just, anyway. So after the glacier went through, then what follows glaciers are, barren soils and bedrock, and then tundra, and then forests begin. And we know a little bit about the forest right here in South Egremont because it's been studied. There is, this gets to the elephant. There is a mastodon site that's right close to here. It's like a mile away. And it's called the Ivory Pond Mastodon. And they did not find some of the things they were looking for. They found no evidence of weapons, for example. Because one of the prominent theory about what happened to Ice Age animals was that they were hunted out. So they were looking hard to see if there was any sign of that, and there was not. But there was a lot of interesting detritus from the trees. There were cones, there were fir trees, spruce trees, tamarack trees, there were chestnut trees. So they were looking at any twigs or anything that fell into the bog along with the mastodon. So we kind of know what that forest looked like when he was here, and he's been carbon dated to about 12,000 years ago. Now, so there was no sign of people here then in that instance. I don't know what. I don't really know anything about those early Paleo Indians in this area, but I do know that there were sites of woodland peoples from thousands of years ago. One is in Campusa Bog in Stockbridge, and another is Robbins Swamp down Route 7. You can see it, and it's down near Lake Falls Village. So there were sites there, and then the one that we're more sure about is the one that you can read about here in this beautiful presentation, and that is the Mohicans. When they came, they were part of when the Dutch were running the fur trade in the Hudson Valley on the other side of the mountains. The Mohawks and the Mohicans were furnishing skins and furs to the Dutch, who would then load them on canoes and take them down the river, put them on a ship to Europe. But then they began to fight over the privilege of doing that, and I guess the Mohicans kind of lost, and so they decided to move out of the area, or they were forced to. And they came across into the Berkshires through the Green River. Presumably it was wetter here, and the Green River was more of a navigable river. And they came down all the way down to the Housatonic, which is just the really southern part of Great Barrington. And they stayed here for a while. You can read, and maybe Kathy's going to go over what some of the strife was between the white settlers when they came, and these native peoples. And they did do some farming, so there was some land clearing involved, and they continued to hunt and gather. And so I'm going to leave it here so that Kathy can take over with her. With agriculture, and then Renee can talk about rarity, and it's been a pleasure. Thank you.
All right, well, it's great that Mother Nature has been so accommodating today. A quick piece. So one of the things that was left out of my bio because it had to be cut back is that really I got my start because Nancy I was working with Nancy at both the Land Trust and Sweetwater Trust. And that really laid a fantastic foundation for understanding the wild, the natural, and the agricultural, and how all of this works together. And you can't really understand where we are today without having both of those, and the crucial importance of that. So we have about 15 minutes, so that Brenny will have some time, and then it'll be time for answers. So I'm going to do kind of a quick 60,000-foot summary, and then get into a little bit of detail. So Nancy was talking about how the Mohicans, were here for a long time before any of the European settlers came. And yes, as she was saying, there was both the hunting and gathering and the agriculture that was going on. Just like settlers, as you have populations growing, you need more resources to be able to support you. But the Mohicans, when you look at the archaeological sites, they tended to not be more than, say, 50 in a place at a time, and they had an agricultural network. So you could see at these, when you're going through the archaeological sites, you're finding the implements that you're usually talking about, and then you're also finding the mazes, the millets, the grasses, the sedges. All the things are done so that where you're seeing the same way that settlers, end up having to do both. You see all of that in much more harmony, obviously, with nature than what happens with us. And so when the Dutch first came into the area, they came over from New York State, and the first deed that was out from the Mohicans, or what became known as the Mohicans, was in 1685. And that was well before, in theory, any of the Dutch were supposed to be settling here. But, this was uncharted territory. And I remember Frank Curtis, whose family, was here for several hundred years, talking to him when I was a kid. And he said some of his early ancestors had come over in the late 1600s. We learn lots about the folks who come, from Westfield and the other side, John Ashley, Matthew Noble, but this other piece really doesn't get as much coverage. So now it is, as you're starting to look at the Mohican histories, the bigger picture is starting to show up. So, as with all of Native peoples, the relationship started well, but then as more and more settlers came, and they wanted more and more space and more land, and to control things and do things the way that they wanted, the differences in the culture is starting to be a problem. And because culturally, there's different understandings. For Native peoples, the concept of ownership of the land doesn't really exist. So that becomes a problem when you have European settlers for whom the concept of ownership is rock solid. And this becomes an issue even more so the Dutch had come over, as I said, the earliest deeds, 1685. Then by the early 1700s, like 1703, 1704, there was a large land grant, the Westenhoek land grant, which the Dutch had. It's a huge area, kind of going from all the way down Salisbury, Connecticut, all the way up to Lee, West Stockbridge, that area, Sheffield, Egremont, Alford, Great Barrington, all of this. But in the language, it said that in addition to rent, they were supposed to clear and make improvements within 6 years. And although rent was paid, improvements were never made because, this is the back of beyond. People weren't here yet. About 30 years later, the folks coming from Westfield, they came in, and there was then the grant, the sale of roughly the same area to the committee from the Massachusetts Bay Colony. And that then set up, issues between the Dutch and the English. And with all those settlers here, the Mohicans were getting pushed out. At first there were purchases. Then, some by misunderstanding, some by machination. There was chicanery, there was stealing, there was all sorts of things. But what ended up happening was that where the Mohicans had been doing relatively small clearings, they did do some clearing of land for their agriculture. The settlers were doing a lot more. Not a lot more compared to today, because back then, if you had a hoe, an axe, it would take, you could maybe in a growing season plant, harvest 2 or 3 acres, right? And they were also clearing the land, right? So they were chopping down, girdling trees, burning, all those things. So there was not a lot being done. All of the agriculture at that time was really much more focused on family, what you needed to survive, what you were doing. You might barter and trade with your neighbor, with locals. You might get, there was like 0.9 of a ton, of hay that would be, harvested from an acre, as opposed to now where you're getting 5 to 6 tons an acre, right? Or if you've got really good land and really well managed, some places are getting like 10 tons to an acre, right? Same way, when you were harvesting some of the other grains, it was being measured in bushels. Today, you're talking about, 20, 21 tons of corn to an acre. And that's both because of the technology that happened, the resources that they're putting in, and the fact that it's all cleared. But anyway, so in the early days, we don't have a lot of time, so I'm gonna skip through some of this. Sorry, there's so much to go through. I don't want to steal all of everybody's time. So, oh no, you don't get out of it that easy. People came to hear all of this. So at the time, you'd have, most of the farms, you would have 2-3 cows, horses, pigs. Most of the animals that you had to have more than one use. So, with your chickens, your geese, your turkey, all of those, you got not only, your eggs and some meat, but you also had feathers, down, and they were providing pest control, right? They were eating your grasshoppers and all those things that were coming to eat your crops. Cows, you had both milk, meat, all the things for making cheeses and everything else there, as well as, hides. Pigs, same thing. Pigs were crucial back then because they would just kind of let them go. You had a brand, you marked them with something, and then they would ramble. They would eat everybody's refuse, they would eat, the garbage, they would eat whatever plants they could find in nature. They were not the big fatty, meaty things you have today, but they could be cured. And that way they had food for overwinter, which was a big deal. So again, sheep, goats, again, everybody had to have multiple uses. And at that time, there were very kind of specific tasks that everybody had. Everybody in the family was focused on doing this. But, the women had very clear roles, the men had clear roles, the kids helped out. The place where that kind of overlapped sometimes was in milking. Men and women milked. At hay time, everybody chipped in, right? Because, it's bad enough today when you've got great meteorology, you've got, all sorts of technology. Then, your weather, everything was that. So if you had a good stretch, everything came in. You had your neighbor helping. And the other piece is that agriculture really was the thing that kept, if you read there's 2 books that, since there's not a lot of time today, I want to recommend. There's both Lillian Price's Sheffield Frontier Town and Jim Miller's Early Life in Sheffield, and they have fantastic descriptions of things. If I had time, I would read you. There's 3 pages in Jim's, in Jim's book where it just describes the life, and you get the ethos of how it's all going. Fantastic resources. Anyway, so you go from that to when you start getting mechanization, when you start getting more animals. So oxen, horses, then you're able to do like an acre in a day. That's a big deal. That means, okay, if you have 20 acres, you can, you can do in 20 days what that was. And most people at that time, there were 2 or 3 acres. You had 4 or 5 acres, 10 acres. Then you had the really big landholders, like Ashley's, who had 50 acres tillable. They might have a lot more land in terms of pasture and other things, but tillable, there was only just so much that you could do. Now, with our modern equipment, you're doing the same thing. It's just an entirely different world. But then you were able to build. Agriculture was what helped people to come out of poverty, increase their life, quality of life. And when the railroad came, so the Berkshire Agricultural Society, they started the Barrington Fair, and in 1842, in 1842, there was the first cow show, which is the beginning of what the fair was. And until the fair really closed for the final time in 1998, it was the longest running agricultural fair in New England. Interestingly, it started at the same time when the Houstonic Railroad had its first people coming in. And the railroad also did something else. It moved agriculture in this area from, that really local family sustenance kind of piece to commercial agriculture. Dairy jumped in. You go from 2 or 3 cows to many people having 4 or 5 cows. Some people having 15 or 19 cow herds. And it was all because they were shipping down to New York. So you could have, your produce, your dairy, your crops, your meats, your everything would get put on the railroad in either Ashley Falls or Sheffield, and they'd be down in New York City in a couple hours, right? Stunning. And I remember Frank Curtis also saying that he remembered that the family talking about the fact that the food that was grown up here would be shipped down there. And Mr. Blumenthal, when he moved here in the 90s or 2000s, he remembered seeing the Sheffield Creamery milk cans coming off the railroad in Brooklyn and the Bronx. Right, this is, that's what it's, but again, the railroad made a tremendous difference. And that's also when people's, it had been bartering, a lot of bartering and settling before. Hardly any cash because there was not a bank anywhere, right? The nearest banks were, in Pittsfield, and they failed a lot because this was, again, in terms of that time, kind of the back of beyond. So it was all about bartering. So initially, if you had any kind of, if you had leftover grains, that went over to the Hudson River Valley. But then, once the Erie Canal opened in, 1835, something like that, then that was no longer the case because they got much less expensive goods coming from the West. So at that point, the extra went to the distilleries. And there were a couple of distilleries in the area that provided the local piece. Apples were also a really huge crop because they stored well over the winter. You could eat fresh, you could eat dried, and they also made cider. And in this area, there were basically from Barrington down to Kent, there were apple trees all the way along the way, and there were orchards, and there were almost as many cider mills as there were orchards because it didn't spoil. Right, so that was something that was safe. You could get drunk, but it's not going to spoil and kill you. And so, you had it fresh, and then as it aged, it was still drinkable. So all of these things, it was all really tied into that living. Interestingly, there's a great exhibit over at the Historical Society that focuses on the 54th Regiment, Company B, the Free Black Men. And when you look at what their professions were when they came back, because they were able to, because of the Emancipation Proclamation, everybody who came back, was free. And a lot of them were farmers, and they were able to work their way up. And again, it's very different than today, where it's kind of a sad statement, but there's the joking around of how do you, for the farmer today, how do you have a farmer who makes a fortune? You start with a larger fortune, right? That's a very big shift, where agriculture, if you read the histories, agriculture was the way to be able to bring yourself up, bring your community up. As when you got the larger dairy herds, when you got the commercial agriculture going on, not only did the people's quality of life improve, the houses improved, the barns improved, everything improved, the health improved. So although today we have tremendous food opportunities here and incredible agricultural capacity, the value that society places on agriculture kind of got lost along the way. And I think that hopefully, potentially, when people went into the grocery stores during the pandemic, and there was not every kind of thing you could possibly want on the shelves at every possible moment. And you saw the gaps in the food system. More people started to realize, hey, you know what? Farming, that's a real thing. That really has value. Stuff doesn't just grow out of those shelves. So, with any luck, if we are all able to help encourage this, that the value will come back and people will realize that, that there is a reason why food costs more. It's because it really costs them that much to produce. For folks who are doing crops, and who can do retail, they're able to have a little more control over things. Our dairy, in this area, dairy is huge. And it stayed huge as it did from right after, the railroads came in. But our dairy farmers have no control over the price that they are paid. It's set at the federal level. And so most years, they're actually paying more to produce their milk than they are getting back, which is why value add and those kinds of things are so important. But again, so I think that where the value of agriculture was really understood when people were closer to it, we need to be able to understand that and help people to reconnect with that now. And so again, we are so fortunate in this valley. Fantastic agricultural land. There is a quote in one of the books, I think in Jim Miller's book, about a gentleman in Sheffield who said his 150-acre farm in Sheffield was as profitable as his 1,100-acre farm out in Indiana. Right? So these are things that we have the resource base, we also have the human resource base, the skilled people, and we have the population that to consume it. You need to have the consumer and the producer, within proximity. So, do you know how much time am I over? How much more should I?
Kathy, I'll listen to you talk for as long as
Well, yeah, no. But Rennie needs to. All right, maybe 5 more minutes. So I am skipping through a lot of stuff here. So anyway. Pigs. So a little bit more about the Free Black community. So Sheffield, as everybody knows, has an amazing place through Mumbet and Theodore Sedgwick and the Sheffield Declaration and those elements. But in 1790, there was listed that there were a group of free black owners who paid their poll and property taxes, and their families formed the nucleus of the free voting black community in a society where slaves continued to exist. So again, an incredible example of how agriculture, being able to be self-sufficient, helping yourself, helping your neighbors, enabled something to happen ahead of its time. Of course, there were setbacks, but the agricultural base that we have here, the land, the skills, the people, it really, the same way that it's with the Mohicans and all the Algonquin and the Iroquois, having a natural, the environment that enabled them to thrive makes a big difference for once the social network is there, once the social will is there. And I get struck by that frequently. So another example. So West Sheffield and East Sheffield, very different kinds of land, as Nancy was talking about. As you get over farther to the east, you start getting a lot more of the schists and the not as great farmland. Over on this side, we have, in the valley, you have fantastic, all the things you learned about the Nile River Valley, when you were in school. The same thing here in the Housatonic. Fantastic soils coming out of the river. So in 1815 and 1817, the Andrew Andrews family, who was over here on Undermountain, that, in this area, they were bartering and selling everything but the kitchen sink. I mean, it's amazing, from lambs to straw hats to anything you can possibly think of. By 1821, they were paying someone else 50 cents for 2 days' work to dig potatoes for them, right? That was a big deal in that time. And for a third of a day's work, 17 cents to do all their fencing, right? In southeastern Sheffield, another family, they started out in 1823 and 25, they were kind of taking in boarders to make ends meet. By 1835, they seldom worked for others, and by the end of the decade, their farm was worth $10,000. That's like $350,000 in today's money. So you get a sense of how important agriculture is here. The yields, I talked a little bit about yields to begin with. What's happened with technology and mechanization is stunning. And there's an incredible amount of good that came from the science. And the science came, again, from being able to, when the railroad came, being able to bring in the commercial agriculture so people weren't just having to scrape by and just barely make it. They were able to start thinking, okay, how do I do this? How do I do that? How do I improve it? And before I wrap up, I want to jump to that piece of it. So this area, there's always been a tremendous amount of innovation and high quality farms. There's so there's a lot of material about all of this that's at the Old Stone Store in Sheffield. The last weekend is this weekend, so today and tomorrow, 11 a.m. to 4 p.m. And there's the Voices from the Fields, the Family Farms of Sheffield exhibit is there. And this was, about 10 years ago, we did the first one, which was much larger. Nancy spearheaded that, and it was spectacular. Sheffield today still has 40 farms, right? In the mid-1800s, there were 125. There were several hundred, earlier in the late 20th century. But even as the number of farms has shrunk, the productivity has increased and the sizes have increased. And so in Sheffield, Ashley Falls, the Hurlwood Holstein Farm was known as a spectacular, innovative dairy. This is where Twin Rivers Farm is today, the Kilmers. And when you look at a list of the farms, there was like 125 farms, at that time, and the names that you see that were there, they're still here today. So Chapin is now being formed by Morgan Allen. Spore is now, being farmed by the Larkins. There's just, you look at it, and the families have kept the land together so that land base is there as is needed. And the skilled farmers, again, have passed the knowledge and the ability down from generation to generation. So when the Hurlwood Holstein Farm was doing its final dispersal, so when you stop dairy farming, you have a dispersal sale, and when you've got a fantastic herd, you do it. It's fancy. So there was a whole book. It was blue. It had gold. It was tied together. This is just a black and white copy of what it was, but it gets sent out to the entire dairy world. And then people come and they buy, those individual cows, or they buy, multiples. But we are so fortunate that we actually have the records of this. And it's fascinating to look at, right? So we've got that here. And then in, right on Limekiln Road, so if you, come here, go down Bow Wow Road, take a left, go up Limekiln, the Chase's Bow Wow Farm, that actually was a Chase farm, even back in the mid-1800s. Different Chase family, but the Chase farm. Today, that's the Pothles. And they were tenant farmers for 50 years. And so there wasn't anything they could do to kind of invest in the buildings. And the family member that they were leasing from had medical issues, and so everything kind of fell down around everybody's ears. But before that, that had been some of the most innovative dairying going on. There were articles in the Courier and in the Eagle about what they were doing there. There was a tramway that they created to the trench to be able to help with mechanize things and make it go smoothly. There were awards that were given, and so that continues today with Pine Island Farm. They were one of, if not the first farm in Massachusetts to have an anaerobic digester, where you take the manure and basically it gets cooked. And so that it kills off all of the bacteria that creates the smell and any problems. And then they have the liquid to be able to use as fertilizer without smell issues and without any runoff issues. And then you have the solids, which are able to be used for bedding, right? And so you're saving, and there's all sorts of efficiencies that happen when you do that. So that's right here in Sheffield, and then Twin Rivers Farm, which I mentioned just before, they have a robotic milker. The Turners in Egremont also have a robotic milker. Hylon Farm also has that. But the idea there is the robotic milkers, they give the cows the ability to just come in whenever they want to be able to be milked. And they have transponders, so when they come in, the computer recognizes who it is, and it does, and cows have nutritionists, if you don't know this. And each cow has its own specific ration that's specifically designed for its best health. And so the computer knows how much it's eaten so far. And each time it comes, it gives out a little bit more. And if it comes in and its ration is done for the day, it won't feed it. If that cow hasn't had its total ration for the day, the computer calls the farmer and says, hey, not enough. And then the farmer goes and finds that cow and brings it in, right? So we have still today in Sheffield and in the Southern Berkshires in general, we have that great innovation going on. I could go on and on forever, but then Rennie wouldn't be able to talk about the fantastic rare species here because of all the calcium and calcareous areas. But anyway, yes, go take a look at the Voices from the Fields, Family Farms of Sheffield, and Rennie, you're up.
I'll just get started. So I want to say thank you to Crossroads and Nancy for putting this together, and Kathy and Will for being heroes for Sheffield. I remember when Nancy said, "Hey, we're putting this thing together." 2 or 3 months ago, she's like, "Do you want to speak?" And I'm like, "Well, what do you want me to talk about?" And then she said that you just get to talk about Sheffield and why it's so ecologically awesome. And I don't get to gush about Sheffield like I used to when I ran Bartholomew's Cobble, and I had a big audience back then. I work for the Nature Conservancy now, and I'm more behind the scenes in the environment. But so I jumped at the chance. I said, "Hey, I'd be happy to gush about Sheffield. It's my favorite place on the planet." Playing cleanup's nice because I can help out a little bit. So the mastodon that was found here, there's a little piece of that bone at the Bartholomew's Cobble in the visitor center. If you go there, you can actually see a piece of the bone from the mastodon that was found close by here in Egremont. And talking about the Native American history here, I had Warren Wilcox, who has a farm right above Boardman Street, right on the New Marlboro border up there. He came with his arrowhead collection. And there's some arrowheads in the photo over there. It says early history. There's 2 of them in there that are bifurcated, meaning there's like a little loop in there, and they can date those points because of the stuff that they find around them when they do archaeological studies, and they date those points to around 5, 6, 7,000 years old, and those I think are the oldest points in and around Sheffield. And I believe, Nancy, that Awesome, so barn swallows. Because his farm is way above the Housatonic, way up there, I believe that was a lakeshore back in the day, and those Native Americans were camped upon one of those glacial lakes. That's just my thought on that. So that's my little bit of cleanup. So I'm going to tell you ecologically, why we're so great down here. It's an amazing place, and I recognize a lot of faces here, and I think everybody kind of knows it already, but we'll talk about it again. Nancy was talking, and Kathy talked too, about the calcium that we have here 500 million years ago. The inland sea and the types of creatures that created the coral reefs that created the land. The calcium here that was thrust up during the mountain building orogenies. That's still here today. You can go to Bartholomew's Cobble and you could see those rocky knolls. That's the remains of a coral reef. So we have everything here in Sheffield, from limey soils, really limey soils, growing right on top of the coral reef, to acidic soils underneath hemlock trees. So we have the whole entire range. We also have the topography. So we have everything from the top of Mount Race, where you have poor mineral soil, all the way down to the Housatonic, where you have rich alluvial floodplain soils that support incredible agriculture. So in this one little pocket of Massachusetts, we have almost all, if we had a beach, we'd have everything, but we can go to Cape Cod if you don't mind the traffic. But here we have almost everything that every other place in Massachusetts has in this one little spot. And then, think about the Berkshires too. I know I'm always talking about this with my wife, is like in the summer, my wife and I, we go up into Savoy and Peru and Cummington to hang out. You guys you're 10 degrees, like sometimes warmer down here. So in the spring, you guys get the first spring ephemerals. You get a longer growing season down here than other parts of Berkshire County. So limey soils, what does that mean? So because a really calcium-rich soil, it's not common in Massachusetts. It's here, and this kind of like this thread of calcium kind of goes up into Vermont and then comes down through here. The rest of Massachusetts doesn't have that. And because of that, we're just chock-a-block full of rare species. Take Bart's Cobble. I used to run Bart's Cobble. They have over 800 species of plants have been found at Bartholomew's Cobble. That's only on 300 acres. It's a small little piece of land with over 800 species of plants. It's a minor flyway. It's in the Berkshires, Bartholomew's Cobble has the highest number of bird species that have been seen anywhere in the Berkshires. It's pretty crazy. Schnapp Brook, which now I help to manage, which is like close to 1,000 acres down and around here. I can't even tell you. I used to think Bartholomew's Cobble had rare species. This Schnapp Brook, I'm getting goosebumps talking about it. You guys some of you might have an idea, and I know Nancy has an idea, but that place has one of the largest concentration of rare species in all of Massachusetts. And it has one of the most unique, unspoiled ecosystems in the state and in the entire lower New England area. And it has to do not only with the fact that it's protected, it's relatively unfragmented, and all the water's coming off of the tectonics and burbling down through the groundwater and sometimes off of the in rivers. It's clean. It's so clean, and that I can't tell you how. If it wasn't for the invasive species in there, it'd be absolutely pristine. So the state recognizes rare species and habitat through a couple iterations that the Nature Conservancy's helped the Department of Natural Heritage and Endangered Species do. It's called Biomap, and I don't know if anyone's ever seen it, but basically what it does is it maps the state, and then it takes the rare species and the notable species and forest blocks, and it puts them in color codes. And I wish I'd brought a big map of it, but I couldn't find one. and it says core habitat and supporting habitat. And if you look at this biomap from the National Heritage Endangered Species Program of Massachusetts, Sheffield is almost entirely green except for downtown, right? And then we fan out a little bit and include Egremont and Mount Washington. Like the whole corner of our area is just block green for importance of rare species and habitat, and it's incredible. And let's see, so when you okay, so talk about this. So the Natural Heritage and Endangered Species is the Department of Fisheries and Wildlife in Massachusetts. They have 432 rare plant species in Massachusetts, or rare species in Massachusetts, right? Sheffield has 60 of the plant has 60 plant species that are rare for Sheffield. That's 15% of all rare plant species in the state of Massachusetts are in Sheffield. And it ranks as one of the top towns in all of Massachusetts for rare species. Has 31 rare animal species for a total of 91 rare plant and animal species in the state of Massachusetts. Our forests are coming back strong, after the iron industry. The forests are coming back. I mean, look at this mountain range behind you, the Taconics. It's ridiculously awesome. I can't even tell you. That's Berkshire Taconic Plateau is ranked, I wrote it down. It's ranked as one of the most diverse, healthiest, and largest forest blocks in all of lower New England, from Maine to Virginia. This mountain range back here is one of the healthiest and biggest blocks left. I know before my time at the Nature Conservancy, there was a goal to protect up to 10,000 acres in there, and it was a tri-state effort. And we worked with all the towns and stuff, and it did. We reached that goal. We helped to protect 10,000 acres up there. I think it's even more now. It's crazy. Yep. So there's all sorts of good news, but Nancy also said she wanted me to talk a little bit about bad news, so I'm sorry about it. But there are some threats, so it's not all good in Sheffield. This farming and the fact that we've been here for so long has opened up the land to a lot of invasive species. You probably can also, if you want to take all these firsts and stuff, and the best, you have the most invasive species of any other Berkshire town. And so many, I can't even tell you. I've been battling invasive species down here for over 20 years, and it's crazy. The new stuff on the horizon, Japanese primrose. I asked Greg Ward at Ward's Nursery to stop selling that. He agreed. He's a hero. I love that guy. Japanese stiltgrass, hardy kiwis here, black swallowwort, chocolate vine. These are all new things. Everybody knows about Oriental bittersweet, right? But you want to know about the new stuff coming in, because that's when you actually have a real fighting chance. There's no way we can ever get rid of all the Oriental bittersweet, but please pay attention to anything new on the horizon and try to get rid of it if you can. Climate change, climate chaos is probably going to hit us pretty hard here. They say by about 2050, the area, our climate around here could be like New Jersey's. I hate to compare us to New Jersey, but that might affect our sugar maples, the prevalence of pests like hemlock woolly adelgid. They get knocked back by, extreme winters, but they could be on the rise, which would affect our forests. Cool weather, nesters like up on the top of Race Mountain. There's some real neat things like towhees breed up there, and yellow-rumped warblers and things like that normally breed further up to the north, up in the Canada and stuff. They still nest up on top up there. They could be pushed out. Brook trout. And then nobody says it enough, but we got way too many deer here in Sheffield. Deer are a humongous problem. And I'm sorry, Nancy, I know you love your deer. But, boy, it's bad. I took Bob Weatherall out to our property, our Drury Preserve, and I was hiking with him. And he's like, wow, you have a real, he's the state botanist, and we were looking for some rare plants. He goes, you have a real deer problem here. And I'm like, what are you talking about? And it's because we're accustomed to seeing what we know. You know, you go out in the woods and you see it, and it doesn't look bad. It looks great. It's forest. You know, it's awesome. And I'm not an expert on deer. You know, I just, I hunt them, but I'm not an expert on them. And he's like, you just don't know what you're looking at. So we looked at this giant rock escarpment, and he goes, you see how that giant piece cleaved off? And it did. It landed flat, but it was like 10 feet high. And he said, check the top of that boulder out. And it was festooned with plants. It was like a carpet of plants on top of the boulder. He goes, look at your forest floor. And there wasn't much. So, yeah, so that's another one. I'm always trying to, eat more deer. Sorry, Nancy. So those are just some of the threats, but, not only, I wasn't asked to speak about this, but not only are we ecologically lucky, the sense of community, I think that'll probably touch on the crossroads bits down here. You guys are probably unlike any other town in the Berkshires that I know of. You guys have such a sense of community down here. It's so welcoming. And it's diverse too. It's everything from salt of the earth farmers to, rich landowners coming up from New York for their second homes. But everybody gets along. I remember I used to notice this when I worked at the Cobble. I used to go into the Sunrise Diner, which is now torn down. But there'd be these crazy people just all in one spot and just celebrating this town. And I guess that's kind of where I want to leave it, that, you're lucky in so many ways and fortunate, and, let's keep it up. Yeah? All right. Thanks.
Well, you'd think as the MC I would know what time this was supposed to end, but I don't. And so 2 to 3:30. Well, if folks have any specific questions, I think, folks that need to leave certainly do so, but if there's some specific questions, I think it's worth asking them. Yeah.
I always wondered about some of the designations of invasive species, particularly the iris, the yellow iris. I remember when I first moved here, I was working with Elizabeth Keene as an apprentice at Indian Line Farm, and she's like, oh, this is a terrible thing. And then I don't really see it spreading, and it's pretty, and I don't see very many of them. It's not like the multifloral rose or something.
So invasive species are horrible, right? Nobody wants to plant these things. They're not, they'd be nefarious and say, oh man, I'm going to plant these in my garden and wreck the environment all around me. Nobody sets out to do that. You know what I mean?
No, but I mean,
it
I
just
just
happens.
want
What I want to
to
tell you.
that one.
Right,
Because
so that one
I've been here
specific-
25 years, and the yellow iris is, I don't see
When
that.
it blooms, take a ride down to Smiley's Pond. You know Smiley's right down the street? And that'll answer your question. It is a biblical plague in Smiley's Pond. Just pull over on the side of the road. Trust me, you asked the question. Yeah.
I mean, maybe it's okay. I mean, our climate is changing. I mean.
Oh, maybe it's okay. Yeah, okay. So you're asking why, right? Because nothing eats it. So with invasive species, they don't belong here. So what happens is we're talking about this, it's like an abundance crisis, right? You've heard about like the insect apocalypse, like we don't have insects like smashing into our windshields anymore because there's not as many as there used to be. Like even our common birds are diminishing in numbers. It's habitat loss, it's pollution, it's a number of things. But anywhere where there's a yellow flag iris and at Smiley's Pond, if there's acres of it, anywhere where there's acres of barberry, nothing eats it. So there's no insects. So every bird species feeds on insects, even hummingbirds feed their babies insects. So where there's no insects, obviously you're gonna have less insect variety. But then the birds, there's no food for the birds to eat. So that's the insidious nature and then factor in deer, right? So deer love to eat plants. Now we have more deer in Sheffield than we've ever had, right? So the deer don't eat the invasives, so there's more pressure on these rare species that we have, right? And then those rare species and the native species are the ones that have the insects. So it's like this kind of cascade effect with invasive species. They're really bad. Sorry, I don't know.
Ben, what?
Yeah, so how many hundreds or thousands of millions of years will it take till somebody learns how to eat bittersweet?
Well, they are working on biocontrols. You don't see the purple loosestrife plague like you used to, right? It seems like it's kind of gone down. That's because they have 3 beetle species now that they found specifically target purple loosestrife. And I've been trying to go to as many of those symposiums as I can when they talk about biocontrols. They have one now for Phragmites that they released in Canada.
These are insects that they're developing to do this?
They
or
go
that
to the
found?
native habitat, find the prey on
Bring them back.
and then bring them back. But it's a strong vetting process because
Things go wrong.
yes, cane toad.
Yeah, cane toad, yeah.
So, but in the local
Spongy bug.
ecology, how long would it take for something
It's a
to?
good question. The
Some
fungus for
genetic
spongy
freak
moth
that
came
could eat
of its
better
own
sweet.
volition. What's that? Yeah, I can't answer that. I don't know. Sorry. I don't know when that'll happen.
So just make your knotweed pie and your garlic mustard pesto and keep at it.
But, there's, you talk about invasive species. You guys know who Hal Borland is? He was a nature writer, lived down the street on Weatog Road, right over in Salisbury, Connecticut. That's my job. My job is to look at all the negative and try to combat it. Once in a while I get to do some rare native species stuff, but mostly it's fighting. So I gotta always try to tell myself this. Hal Borland he wrote this book called The Book of Days, where he talks about, he writes about something on his farm down there on the Housatonic every day. And he talks about the day before how a friend of his came to visit, and all day and all night they talked about the ills of the world. So the next day he's writing his book, and he says, as I look out at my farm, I know there are hundreds of things that are wrong with the world, but as I look out over my farm, I'm reminded that there are still thousands of things that are right. So as you walk through a forest that's full of barberry, don't focus just on the barberry. There's still a ton of stuff that's around you that is still native and worth fighting for. So, yeah,
But kill the
that's-
barberry.
But
Yeah.
kill the
While
barber.
you're there.
Yeah. Any others? No? Well, thank you all for coming. Please feel free to stay and walk around the grounds, or if you don't have time, come back. This is a public space. Please enjoy. There's 70 acres on this side of the road, 30 acres across the road, and a new collaborative project between Greenagers, Egremont Land Trust, and Sheffield Land Trust just down the road, Bow Wow Woods, is 50 acres of beautiful forest. And apropos to this conversation, on September 23rd and 24th, there will be the Berkshire BioBlitz there, where we'll be doing an inventory of all biota of that land, and perhaps some new species will come up.